We begin the top 36 wide receiver rankings for week 2 with wide receivers that I think could be within the top 30. At 36, we have Lockett, 35, Xavier Worthy, 34, Jaden Reed, and 33, Calvin Ridley. With Tyler Lockett, I expect DK Metcalf to primarily receive the coverage of Christian Gonzalez, so I think his matchup is going to be a lot easier. I think that they are going to win this game, and I expect Tyler Lockett to be a little bit more efficient. It remains to be seen as to whether he's going to be able to fend off JSN, though. With Xavier Worthy, keep in mind that while, yes, he had a fantastic week, he did that on the back of 3 touches. Now, to his benefit, it looks like Hollywood Brown is set to miss another week. He still hasn't returned to practice. So if Hollywood Brown is out, that does bode well for him in his ceiling. It's just, once again, keep in mind that that was on 3 touches. If he's able to see, say, 5 to 7 touches on the regular per week, then I'd have him a lot higher in these rankings. It's just asking him to repeat that efficiency from week to week is asking quite a bit, even though he's really talented. The play calling's great, and Mahomes is one of the best, if not the best, quarterback in the NFL. So I would definitely temper expectations until we see a larger workload for him on a week-to-week basis. With Jaden Reed, it's a fantastic matchup. If he was playing with Jordan Love, I would like him a lot more now. It's just, without Jordan Love, we really need to be skeptical here. I do expect him to receive manufactured touches such as rushes and designed short area targets. So I do think that of all the Packers wide receivers, he's the guy you want. It's just, what can we expect from Malik Willis? Yeah, so I do think his ceiling is much lower. As soon as Love returns, though, he is going to skyrocket up these rankings. With Calvin Ridley, he finds himself playing against the Jets. Now, I do expect DeAndre Hopkins to, a lot of the time, receive the coverage of Sauce Gardner. However, if he's playing against Michael Carter or DJ Reed, those are not easy matchups at all. So I think that while on the surface, yes, the Jets are a green matchup in that they allowed a lot of fantasy points to wide receivers, or at least more than other teams, it isn't quite the matchup that you might think it is. And with the disaster that we saw from them in week 1, I want to see a little bit more production from them as an offense in general before I have Calvin Ridley higher up these rankings. This next tier of receivers are players that I think could find themselves as wide receiver 2s if they have a good week. We have Keenan Allen, J-Mo, BTJ, George Pickens, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, and Amari Cooper. One caveat to this is T. Higgins isn't looking as though it's likely he's going to play. If he does, I'm going to have him right there. If he is to miss this game, though, I'm going to move everyone below him 1 spot up, and Christian Kirk would be my wide receiver 36. So with Keenan Allen, he was remarkably inefficient in week 1. He was missed on a wide open layup touchdown by Caleb Williams, but at the same time, he just dropped an easy touchdown that Caleb Williams put right on the money to him. I do expect a lot more efficiency from them as a whole in week 2. And so I like Keenan Allen as preferably a wide receiver 3, but he could definitely have a wide receiver 2 week, especially if he's able to hold on to the ball or be thrown a semi-accurate ball when he's wide open. With J-Mo, we saw an explosion in week 1. I do think he's going to be a little bit more volatile than some people might think. ASRB is going to be targeted a lot more than he was in week 1. He's not going to have weeks like that very often. So I still think J-Mo's a bit boom bust, but I love what we saw from him in week 1. He looked explosive. With BTJ, it is going to be against Denzel Ward. That is a worrying matchup. However, BTJ is 6'3". He toasted Ramsey twice on touchdowns, even though one was a PI that he didn't actually end up getting credit for. Yeah, I'm telling you, BTJ looks really good. Check out my BTJ video I made a while back. I go in depth about all of his skills and his fit in this offense. He's going to be really good. And so I think that if he's able to score a touchdown, he could definitely be a wide receiver 2 this week. I think he's going to get more volume as the season progresses. With George Pickens, he plays against Denver. The good news, he's easily the number 1 target on this offense. The bad news, he has a combination of 2 things working against him. Justin Fields is his quarterback. Yikes. But then besides that, he's going to almost certainly the entire game draw the coverage of Patrick Surtain. Ugh, don't like that. And so for that reason, I think he's probably a wide receiver 3, but he could be a wide receiver 2 if he happens to score on Pat. It's just I would you would prefer that he's your wide receiver 3. At 28, I have Terry McLaurin against the Giants. It's a beautiful matchup. I think we are going to see the deep ball this game from Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels has a beautiful deep ball that we just didn't see in week 1. I think McLaurin has a much better week this week. I just think that it would be a hard press to expect much more than at best a wide receiver 2 week from him. At 27, like I said, T. Higgins, if he plays, I like his matchup. I expect Jamar Chase to receive the most difficult and concentrated amount of coverage. And so I would expect T. Higgins to have a very good week as their wide receiver 2. If he misses the game, just remove him and then add everyone one spot up and Christian Kirk at wide receiver 36. At wide receiver 26, we have Amari Cooper against Jacksonville. So Tyson Campbell is on IR for them, so I do like his matchup this week. It's just Deshaun Watson has not looked very good. The Jags pass rush with Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker looked pretty good in week 1. And so I don't expect Deshaun Watson to have the most time to pass the ball in this game. Although with Amari Cooper, we may see a bit of an increased target share with David Njoku being ruled out. So he's a high upside but relatively low floor play this week. With all of these wide receivers, I think that they are a good bet to be wide receiver 2s, but do have opportunities to be a low-end wide receiver 1 if they happen to have a good week. At 25, we have DK Metcalf, 24, Chris Godwin, 23, Tank Dell, 22, Zay Flowers, 21, Malik Neighbors, 20, Devontae Adams, 19, Drake London, 18, Stephon Diggs, 17, Michael Pittman, and 16, MHJ. With DK Metcalf, he is drawing the coverage of Christian Gonzalez. I expect him to shadow DK. And so I think his floor is pretty low, but with DK Metcalf, we all know that he has a tremendous ceiling on a week-to-week basis, such as his roasting of the Cowboys this past season. So there are a lot of wide receivers, 24 to be specific, that I would rather have than him at this point. But I still think you're going to have to play him. He's probably your wide receiver 2, hopefully your wide receiver 3. Regardless, you're going to play him. At 24, we have Chris Godwin. He is coming off a top 10 week in full PPR. He plays against Detroit. I want to see it from him consistently, but I like what I saw from him, and I was telling people he is going to be used more so in the slot this season, and that is much better for him than playing as a flanker, and it should be a relatively high-scoring game against Detroit, so I do like him this week. Tank Dell against Chicago is a brutal matchup, but he's connected to CJ Stroud. They have a special connection. He was targeted 7 times this past week with Stephon Diggs there and Nico Collins. I think there is enough room for all 3 of these wide receivers to be viable fantasy options. This just isn't the best game, but with his connection to CJ Stroud, you're playing him most likely. If you can afford to sit him, you have a pretty good team. With Zay Flowers, he plays against the Raiders. I do like this for him a little bit more than I did with his matchup against Kansas City. It isn't the best matchup, but I do expect him to receive a good amount of volume, and I don't expect it to be quite as troubling for the Ravens to get the ball going down the field and sustain drives. With Malik Neighbors, he plays against Washington. It's a fantastic matchup. He did pick up a knee injury, so we'll need to just make sure about that before you have him in your lineups. But regardless, he is going to be given a ton of volume. His week 1 performance is just about what I think his floor is in the NFL. So I love Malik Neighbors this week. Devontae Adams is at 20 against Baltimore. It isn't the most inviting matchup, but Devontae Adams is a very good wide receiver. I do expect his target share to go way up. I think we probably see 10 targets from him. They're going to be probably losing handily to Baltimore. So I think he's going to get a lot of volume. I think he's a safe play, even if his ceiling is kind of limited with Gardner Minshew there. At 19, we have Drake London against Philadelphia. That offense in week 1 was disastrous. I do expect a lot more of a bounce back this week with London. I think he's going to get a lot more volume. He was only targeted 3 times. So was Kyle Pitts. Hopefully, we don't see more Arthur Smithisms from the Falcons this year. But regardless, if you have Drake London, he's probably your wide receiver 1 to 2, so you're definitely playing him. And it isn't the worst matchup against Philadelphia. At 18, we have Stephon Diggs against Chicago. Just like with Tank Dell, it is not the best matchup, but he's connected to CJ Stroud, and you're definitely playing Stephon Diggs, especially after his 2-touchdown performance. At 17, I have Michael Pittman Jr. against Green Bay. It's an inviting matchup. I don't think he's going to see that much of Jared Alexander. I expect A.D. Mitchell or Alec Pierce to primarily see him. And so I think we're going to have a bounce back game. Pittman did get the volume. The targets weren't the best, and that's what we're going to see with A-Rich. Pittman isn't going to have a consistent 20-point game average, but he's going to have those 20-point games, and he is going to get the volume necessary to be a regular contributor for you when you're starting lineups. And so I think this is an inviting matchup, and I would definitely play him this week. I don't know how good your team would have to be to regularly be benching him. With Marvin Harrison Jr., week 1 is going to be a blip in the radar. They are going to feed MHJ. MHJ, if you just look at the stat line, you'd think, he's terrible. He was wide open for a 40-yard, potentially game-winning touchdown that Kyler Murray just didn't see him because he was running for his life. Kyler Murray was running for his life essentially the entire game. I mean, Trey McBride didn't have a good game either, even though he had 9 targets. So I do expect a huge bounce back from MHJ, but until we see that he puts up a couple, top 10-ish performances, I'm going to have him a little bit further down, but people need to stop overreacting and calling him a bust after 1 week. Please, look at the film. He is a very savvy route runner. He was getting wide open. He cannot help if Kyler Murray isn't able to find him. Expect much better results from him in week 2 and a lot of times in the future. Wide receivers that I think are going to be either high-end wide receiver 2s or low-end wide receiver 1s are DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. With DJ Moore, Rome Odunze is almost certainly out this week, and potentially Keenan Allen is too. So what I think we're going to see is a lot of target share for DJ Moore this week. Now, he is likely to see a lot of Derek Stingley, so I don't like that part of this matchup, but DJ Moore is really talented. Caleb Williams is a lot more talented than what we saw in week 1, so I wouldn't be worried about DJ Moore, and I think he's going to get a good amount of volume this week. With Mike Evans, he plays against Detroit. I think he's going to have a pretty good week. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game overall, and with Baker Mayfield looking to be on fire already, I think we're going to see a lot of good weeks from Mike Evans, but specifically this week against Detroit. With Chris Olave, everybody was saying that he was going to receive a magnificent target share and be force-fed targets. I did make a video on him where it looks like that could definitely be the case, and I do expect him most weeks to be the most targeted wide receiver. But I was telling people that even though he wasn't the offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak's offenses the past 2 seasons didn't have a distinct wide receiver 1. So I think that, yes, while Justin Jefferson, who is also Justin Jefferson, had about 167 targets in his second season when Kubiak was the OC, I was telling people I don't think that that is quite what we're going to see with Chris Olave. But regardless, I think that he's a very talented player. I like this matchup against Dallas. I think they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit to stay in the game. And so I think he's going to have a much better week this week than he did this past week. And so at 12 and 11, we have Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk against Minnesota. It is not the most inviting matchup. I think Deebo is going to get a good amount of run game usage, and I think Brandon Ayuk is going to be featured as the number 1 wide receiver. I expect this to be a high-scoring game, even though Minnesota isn't a joke of a defense at all. And so I like both of them this week, and I think they're both fringe wide receiver 1s. Wide receivers that I think are going to be wide receiver 1s, but probably not going to be top flight wide receiver 1s, are Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, and Rashee Rice. With Devontae Smith, he plays against Atlanta, and now while this is a red matchup, when you look at the wide receiver performances, well, Atlanta also played Pittsburgh. Besides George Pickens, who do they have? So I don't think that they're going to remain a red matchup per se. I think that AJ Terrell is primarily going to be seeing AJ Brown. And so I expect Devontae Smith to have a much better week this week. I think it's going to be relatively high scoring between them and Atlanta. And so I really like Devontae Smith this week. With Nico Collins, it is a brutal matchup. Not going to lie, it is a terrible matchup. With Nico Collins, though, it does appear that at least if week one is any indication that he is the preferred deep threat for Houston, and he's also their X wide receiver, so he's going to be on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. And even though this isn't the most inviting of matchups, I think we have a solid week from Nico Collins. At 8, we have Rashee Rice against Cincinnati. It is not an inviting matchup by any means. I do expect him to be the most targeted player, though. I expect Kelsey to receive a lot more of a target share. I expect Xavier Worthy to receive a couple, maybe 2 more targets this game. And so I think Rashee Rice is good for 7 to 9 targets again. And he's a very, very safe floor player who just maybe doesn't have the ceiling because he's a better fantasy player than a real life wide receiver. But being the short area target in the Chiefs' offense is, as you've seen, really, really productive for fantasy. Wide receivers that I would be shocked if they aren't wide receiver ones, who I expect to have a legitimate chance to be a top 3 wide receiver this week, are Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra, and CeeDee Lamb. With Garrett Wilson, he did not have the best week 1. It was okay. I think that's his floor. Now, he is going to have to contend with L'Jarius Sneed. I just expect Garrett Wilson to have a much better week this week. He is one of the most talented wide receivers. He finally has a quarterback that can actually throw the ball to him. And so I think that week 1 is just about the floor. With Cooper Kupp, we are seeing a return to dominance. With Puka Nacua being out on IR for at least 4 games, it's looking more like 4 to 6. I think we are going to see top shelf production from Cooper Kupp. It's a beautiful matchup. He's going to be a hyper-targeted wide receiver once again, and so I really like him this week, especially in a cushy matchup against the Cardinals. With Jamar Chase, it is not an easy matchup against Kansas City, but he's Jamar Chase. We've already seen him put up a 50-point game against the Chiefs, although that wasn't his rookie season. But like I said, he's as good of a bet as anybody to have a 50-point game any given week. I expect them to have to throw the ball quite a bit to contend with Kansas City, and I expect Burrow and the offense in general to look a lot better this week. With Justin Jefferson, he plays against San Francisco. Week 1 was his floor. He's, in my opinion, the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. I think we're going to see a return to a top 5 week for him. San Francisco isn't the best matchup, but there are far worse ones. With A.J. Brown, he plays against Atlanta. He is going to see a lot of A.J. Terrell. However, he's A.J. Brown. This offense is going to be incredibly efficient, and he's a solid bet to be a top 5 wide receiver. With Amon-Ra, the volume was insanely low. I think week 1 is absolutely going to be a blip on the radar and not indicative of anything we see from him on a week-to-week basis. He's going to be a volume-driven wide receiver 1, and he is as sure of a thing to have at least 10 to 12 fantasy points in any given week as anybody, with the ceiling for a potential 25-plus point game. I expect them to have to throw quite a bit to contend with Tampa Bay. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game between the two teams. And at 1, we have CeeDee Lamb against the Saints. I think that Marshawn Lattimore is probably going to miss this game. He didn't practice on Thursday. And so, assuming he's out, this is a cushy matchup. They are going to throw the ball quite a bit. CeeDee Lamb is a top shelf wide receiver, and I think we are going to see a return to dominance in week 2 for him. And I think he is, in my opinion, he is the best bet to be the wide receiver 1 this week. All right, so wide receivers that I think have a chance to be in the top 30 are Tyler Lockett, Xavier Worthy, Jayden Reed, and Calvin Ridley. Wide receivers that I think could potentially be wide receiver 2s if they have a good week are Keenan Allen, J-Mo, BTJ, George Pickens, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins. Now, if T. Higgins doesn't play, which it's looking unlikely, but there's still a chance, you move every one of these wide receivers behind him up 1, and you add Christian Kirk at wide receiver 36. And finally, Amari Cooper. Wide receivers that I think are solid wide receiver 2s with potential for a low-end wide receiver 1 week are DK Metcalf, Chris Godwin, Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, Malik Neighbors, Devontae Adams, Drake London, Stephon Diggs, Michael Pittman Jr., and MHJ. Wide receivers that I think are probably high-end wide receiver 2s to potentially low-end wide receiver 1s are DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. Wide receivers that I think are probably wide receiver 1s, but more than likely aren't going to be top 5 are Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, and Rashee Rice. And wide receivers that I think are stud wide receiver 1s that are a decent bet to be a top 3 wide receiver this week are Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and CeeDee Lamb. All right, so those are my top 36 remaining wide receivers that have yet to play. Who do I have that's too low, too high? Who am I missing from this list? Let me know, and let me know why in the comment section below. With that being said, make sure to check out my quarterback, running back, and tight end rankings that are either dropping today or tomorrow, depending on the position. And if you like what you've seen, make sure you like and subscribe especially. I'm going to be releasing these rankings videos for every week of the fantasy football season. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist. Thank you and have a good day.